Welcome to Facebook Live. We rescheduled from yesterday, so thanks for joining us. Today we'd like to talk a little bit about what Aaron Rodgers is going to be doing post-surgically for his collarbone. When the collarbone fractured, they went in and surgically repaired it. So they did put 2 plates and 13 screws in along that collarbone. After the surgery, you can't fight physiology. You have to wait for your body to be able to heal. That's just a natural process. For the first 6 weeks or up to 6 weeks, he's probably going to be in a sling, something that supports the surgical area so that this area can heal. After that, he's going to start in on some light movements, exercises, that kind of stuff to try to regain some range of motion, some basic strength, that kind of stuff. That stuff is all basic, whether you're 5 years old and fell on the playground or you're 85 and you slipped on ice. You have to go through those stages when you have to have that open reduction internal fixation surgery to have that healed. What I really wanted to talk about today is what Aaron Rodgers is probably going to be doing in the aftermath of this to get his biomechanics back on track, to get back into throwing and the kind of demands that are required for a sport like football. So let's talk a little bit about the collarbone and its role in biomechanics. The collarbone, as you can see here, this is Scully. I invited him to help us today. The collarbone, as it comes across through here, as you see, the arm and the shoulder blade with the collarbone are the only things that attach the entire upper body to the trunk. So the collarbone is a very important bone in terms of transferring forces from the arm into the trunk and vice versa, especially with things like throwing or different mechanics where you're using the arm. With this, the collarbone attaches into the shoulder blade here at this joint, and then you can see the shoulder blade kind of sits onto the rib cage to create this joint here. So a lot of what's going to have to happen, let's look at throwing mechanics. When the arm comes back, and ignore this section of the arm, but when the arm comes back to get ready to throw, the humerus or this long bone has to rotate back in this joint, and therefore this shoulder blade and the collarbone as a complex have to be able to kind of rotate backward per se to get some motion here before the arm comes forward in the throwing motion. So there's a lot of rotational demands on this collarbone. And there's a lot of demands on the shoulder blade to be able to rotate back and forth, elevate, depress, pull in, pull out, in terms of stabilizing the shoulder as the shoulder needs to get into those throwing positions. So a lot of what he's going to have to do is not only work on the collarbone area itself and the shoulder itself. Yes, absolutely, he needs to regain motion there. He needs to regain some strength in terms of stabilizing those. But he's going to have to spend a tremendous amount of work to get this shoulder blade complex back into focus. Especially with some time in a sling, these muscles get weak, they get tight, they don't necessarily allow this shoulder blade to be stable but mobile, and we need both sides of that to get into those motions. So he's going to be spending some time working on mid-back, kind of coming down even into the low back, coming down to the side of the body. He's going to be needing to do some heavy demands onto these areas and applying that into throwing motions at the same time. Some of my favorite ways to do that are using some techniques like DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. You've probably seen some other videos from us utilizing some of those techniques where we can get the patient, in this case Aaron Rodgers, laying on his side. He's working on shoulder blade stability while he's actually using that arm motion, and he's using this motion here so that his body starts to learn, when my arm has to do this motion, this has to do other stuff as well. That ties down into the opposite hip, that ties down into what foot he's stepping forward on. So techniques that kind of get a little bit more comprehensive. Instead of just doing shoulder motion, he's going to be working on shoulder tied to hip, shoulder tied to shoulder blade tied to spine, collarbone tied to the sternum or the front breastbone here, and getting everything to kind of coexist nicely back together. So stay tuned, we'll post some extra stuff here coming up, some examples of some DNS exercises that he might be using. DNS is by far not the only technique that you can use. There are a lot of different ones as well, but I just want to really use the example that we don't want to focus just on the shoulder in this case. We've got to take a look at that global picture and really address the other things. Otherwise, when he goes back to throwing, not only are his mechanics going to be off, but his performance is going to be down as well. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you next week.